The morning Nora Bennett walked into the Randsburg schoolhouse for what would be her last day. She noticed the way Superintendent Crawford's eyes traveled down her body with unconcealed disgust, and she knew her teaching career in California was about to end. It was August of 1887, and the desert heat outside made the cramped office feel like an oven, but the coldness in Crawford's voice chilled her to the bone. "Miss Bennett, we have received numerous complaints from concerned parents about your appearance. They feel you do not represent the moral character and physical discipline we expect from those who educate our children." Nora stood perfectly still, her hands clasped in front of her dark blue dress, the fabric straining slightly across her broad hips and full stomach. She had always been a larger woman, even as a girl growing up in San Francisco, but her weight had never interfered with her ability to teach multiplication tables or instill a love of literature in young minds. "Sir, my teaching record is exemplary. Last year's examinations showed that my students scored higher than any other class in Kern County." Crawford waved his hand dismissively, the gesture making his jowls wobble. "That may be, but parents want someone who sets a proper example. How can you teach children about self-control and virtue when you clearly possess neither?" He pushed a small envelope across his desk. "You will receive 2 weeks' salary. I expect you to vacate your quarters by sunset tomorrow." The walk back to her small room behind the schoolhouse felt like a death march. Nora held her head high as she passed curious townspeople on the dusty Main Street, but once her door closed behind her, she collapsed onto her bed and let the tears flow. At 26 years old, teaching was not just her profession. It was her identity, her purpose, the thing that made her feel valuable in a world that constantly reminded her she was too much, too large, too unacceptable. She had saved every penny from her modest salary, hoping one day to open her own school where all children would be welcome regardless of their circumstances. Now that dream seemed as distant as the stars. The next morning, she packed her belongings into 2 large trunks and 1 carpetbag, carefully wrapping the books she had collected over the years. Shakespeare, Whitman, Dickinson, all the voices that had kept her company during lonely nights when the world felt too cruel. The stagecoach would not arrive until the following day, so Nora spent her last evening in Randsburg, walking the outskirts of town, trying to memorize the strange beauty of the Mojave Desert. The sun was setting behind the El Paso Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that no artist could truly capture. She was so lost in thought that she did not notice the rider approaching until his horse nickered softly. "Evening, madam," came a deep voice that carried a hint of Texas drawl. Nora turned to find a tall man astride a buckskin horse. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of strong coffee. His clothes marked him as a working rancher, practical denim trousers and a worn leather vest over a cotton shirt. What struck her most was the absence of judgment in his gaze as he looked at her. He simply looked, the way one person might acknowledge another, without assessment or condemnation. "Good evening," she replied, smoothing her skirt self-consciously. "Name's Jackson Lawson. I have a ranch about 10 miles northeast of here. Couldn't help but notice you look troubled, if you will forgive my forwardness." Nora considered brushing off his concern, but something in his genuine tone made her honest. "I have just been dismissed from my teaching position. I will be leaving on tomorrow's stage." Jackson's eyebrows drew together in a frown. "That seems a terrible waste. I heard from folks in town that the students at the school learned more this past year than they had in the previous 5 combined. My ranch hand's daughter could suddenly read full sentences. Her father was over the moon about it." The compliment warmed Nora more than she wanted to admit. The superintendent and the parents had concerns about my suitability. What concerns could they possibly have about someone who teaches children to read? Nora met his eyes directly, tired of dancing around the truth. They find my physical appearance offensive, Mr. Lawson. They believe I lack the self-control to be a proper role model. Jackson's jaw tightened, and for a moment he said nothing. Then he dismounted, holding his horse's reins loosely. Miss, I have lived 33 years on this earth, and I have learned that people who judge others by their appearance generally do so because they have nothing of substance in their own character. Would you take a short walk with me? I promise to be a perfect gentleman, but I have a proposition that might interest you. Every instinct told Nora this was improper, but something about Jackson Lawson felt safe. Besides, what did she have to lose? Her reputation was already ruined in this town. I suppose a brief walk would be acceptable. They moved slowly through the sagebrush, Jackson leading his horse. The evening air had cooled from the scorching daytime heat, and a light breeze carried the scent of creosote. I am not an educated man, Miss Bennett. I can read enough to get by and do figures for the ranch accounts, but I always wished I had learned more. My father died when I was 12 and I had to take over the ranch. There was no time for schooling after that. That must have been very difficult, Nora said softly. It was what needed doing, so I did it. But now, at my age, I find myself wanting more than I have. I want to read the books people talk about. I want to write letters without having to puzzle over every word. I want to understand history and geography and all the things I missed. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. I would like to hire you as my private tutor. Nora stopped walking, certain she had misheard. You want to hire me to teach you? Yes, madam. I have a large ranch house with several unused bedrooms. You would have your own quarters, completely separate and private. I would pay you the same salary you earned at the school, plus room and board. All I ask is that you spend a few hours each day teaching me what I should have learned years ago. Mr. Lawson, I appreciate the offer, but surely you understand how that would look. An unmarried woman living alone with an unmarried man would cause a scandal. Jackson nodded slowly. I understand your concern, and it is valid. What if I hired my ranch hand's wife, Mrs. Rodriguez, to come stay at the house as a chaperone? She could help with the cooking and housekeeping, and her presence would maintain propriety. She is a good woman, and her husband Pedro is my most trusted employee. They live in the small house on the eastern section of my property with their 3 children. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Nora struggled to process it. Why would you do this for me? You don't know me at all. That's true, but I know injustice when I see it. And I know opportunity. You need a position and I need an education. Seems like we could help each other. Jackson's expression was earnest, without a trace of deception or improper intention. I am not a perfect man, Miss Bennett, but I am an honest one. I give you my word that you would be treated with complete respect in my home. Nora looked back toward the town of Randsburg, where she had been discarded like a broken tool. Then she looked at Jackson Lawson, who stood quietly waiting for her answer, not pushing or pressuring. When would you need me to begin? Would tomorrow be too soon? I could take you back to the ranch in my wagon, save you the stage-coach fare. She thought of her carefully saved money, the nest egg that was now all she had in the world. The practical part of her nature won out. Tomorrow would be acceptable, but Mr. Lawson, I insist on a proper written contract. I may have been dismissed unfairly, but I am still a professional. For the first time, Jackson smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something almost handsome. I would expect nothing less. I will have the papers drawn up tonight and bring them with me tomorrow morning. Shall I collect you at 9 o'clock? 9 o'clock would be fine. They walked back toward town in companionable silence, and when they parted ways, Nora felt something she had not experienced in days: hope. True to his word, Jackson arrived the next morning with a sturdy wagon and a neatly written contract that outlined her duties, salary, and living arrangements. Nora read every line carefully before signing. Mrs. Rodriguez, a pleasant woman in her early 40s with streaks of gray in her dark hair, sat in the back of the wagon and greeted Nora warmly in accented English. "Senor Lawson told me you are teacher," Mrs. Rodriguez said as Jackson loaded Nora's trunks. "My Maria, she talks about you all the time. She says you made reading fun. She cried when she heard you were leaving." Nora felt her throat tighten. "Maria is a wonderful student. She has a gift for language." The ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours, following rough desert roads that wound through scrubby terrain. Jackson pointed out landmarks as they traveled. A distinctive rock formation where he had once sheltered during a sudden storm, a dry creek bed that ran wild during the rare rains, the boundary markers that separated his land from neighboring properties. "How large is your ranch?" Nora asked, genuinely curious. "About 800 acres. Not the biggest spread in California, but it is mine, free and clear. My father started with 40 acres and built it up acre by acre. I have continued that work. We run cattle mostly, some horses. It is a good life, honest work." The ranch house appeared in the distance, a sprawling single-story structure built from adobe and wood. It was much larger than Nora had expected, with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides and several windows that would let in the morning light. Cottonwood trees provided shade near the house, their presence suggesting a water source nearby. "There is a spring on the property," Jackson explained, noticing her gaze. "It is why my father chose this spot. Reliable water is worth more than gold in the desert." He helped both women down from the wagon, his hands strong but gentle when he took Nora's arm to steady her descent. She was acutely aware of her weight, of the way the wagon seat had creaked under her, but Jackson gave no indication that he noticed or cared. The inside of the house was clean but sparse, decorated with the practical mindset of a man who lived alone. The main room served as both living and dining area, with a large fireplace on one wall and a sturdy wooden table that could seat 8. Jackson led Nora down a hallway to a spacious bedroom with a real bed frame, a wardrobe, a washstand, and a writing desk positioned near the window. "I thought you might like a place to work on lesson plans," he said, gesturing to the desk. "If you need anything else, just let me know. Mrs. Rodriguez's room is right next door, and my room is on the opposite end of the house." Nora ran her hand over the smooth wood of the desk, noting the quality of the craftsmanship. "This is more than adequate, Mr. Lawson. Thank you. I hope you will call me Jackson." "Mr. Lawson makes me feel like my father." "Then you should call me Nora. Miss Bennett makes me feel like I am still in the schoolhouse." They smiled at each other, a moment of connection that felt almost natural despite the strangeness of the situation. That afternoon, after Nora had unpacked, and Mrs. Rodriguez had prepared a simple but delicious lunch of beans, rice, and fresh tortillas, Nora and Jackson sat down at the dining table for their first lesson. She had brought her teaching materials, including primers, readers, and several advanced texts. "Before we begin, I need to assess your current level of education," Nora explained, opening a basic reader. "There is no shame in starting wherever we need to start. Every student is different." Jackson nodded, looking more nervous than he had when facing down a charging bull, or so Nora imagined. She asked him to read a passage from the primer, and he did so haltingly, stumbling over longer words. His comprehension was good, but his vocabulary was limited. When she asked him to write a few sentences, His handwriting was cramped and uneven, the spelling creative at best. "You have a solid foundation," Nora said honestly. "You read at perhaps a 5th or 6th grade level, which is more than many adults can claim. We will work on expanding your vocabulary, improving your writing, and building your confidence. If you are willing to practice every day, I believe we can make significant progress." "I am willing to work hard," Jackson said firmly. "I did not bring you all this way to waste your time or mine." They established a routine over the following days. Each morning after Jackson completed his essential ranch work, he would wash up and join Nora at the dining table for 2 hours of intensive instruction. She taught him as she had taught her most dedicated students, with patience and encouragement, but also with high expectations. Jackson proved to be an apt pupil, soaking up knowledge like the parched desert earth absorbed rare rain. In the afternoons, Nora would assign him reading and writing practice while she helped Mrs. Rodriguez with household tasks or worked on developing more advanced lessons. She discovered that, despite her initial concerns, the ranch felt more like home than anywhere she had lived since leaving her family's house in San Francisco. Mrs. Rodriguez was kind company, teaching Nora Spanish phrases while Nora helped her improve her English reading. The work was different from teaching a classroom full of children, but it was no less satisfying. One evening, about 3 weeks after Nora had arrived, she sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Jackson emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee and offered her one. "Mrs. Rodriguez taught me that you take it with just a bit of sugar," he said. "That is very thoughtful, thank you." Nora accepted the cup, cradling it between her hands despite the lingering heat of the day. Jackson settled into the chair beside her, stretching his long legs out in front of him. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you are doing. In just these few weeks, I have learned more than I thought possible. Yesterday I read an entire chapter of that history book without having to stop and puzzle out words. It felt like a miracle. You are an excellent student, Jackson. You have the most important quality for learning, genuine desire. Many people have the opportunity for education but lack the motivation. You have both now." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Jackson spoke again, his voice quieter. "Can I ask you something personal? You can tell me it is none of my business if you want. You may ask. Does it hurt you the way people judge you for your size? Or have you learned to not let it matter?" Nora considered deflecting with a polite lie, but Jackson had been nothing but honest with her. He deserved the same courtesy. "It hurts every single time. I wake up some mornings and forget for just a moment, and then I catch sight of myself in the mirror, or I try to fit into a dress that has grown too tight, and I remember that the world sees me as a failure before I even open my mouth. Teaching was the one place where I felt like I mattered, where what was inside my head was more important than the size of my body. Losing that felt like losing the only value I had." Jackson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I am sorry the world has treated you that way. For what it is worth, I think you have value that has nothing to do with teaching, though you are exceptional at that. You are kind and patient. You laugh at my terrible jokes. You help Mrs. Rodriguez with chores even though that is not part of your duties. You notice things, like how I favor my left knee after a long day riding, and you brought me liniment without making a fuss about it. Those things matter, Nora. They matter a great deal." Tears pricked at Nora's eyes and she blinked them back furiously. "Thank you for saying that. I am only speaking the truth. I have never been good at pretty lies." The weeks turned into months, and autumn brought slightly cooler temperatures to the desert. Jackson's education progressed rapidly. He graduated from primers to novels, devouring books with the enthusiasm of someone who had been starved for stories. Nora introduced him to poetry, to history, to philosophy. They spent hours discussing what he read, and she found his insights surprisingly sophisticated despite his lack of formal education. But something else was growing alongside Jackson's literacy. Nora found herself looking forward to their lessons with an eagerness that had nothing to do with pedagogy. She noticed details about him that she had no business noticing. The way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the strength in his hands as he turned pages carefully as if the books were precious, the timbre of his voice when he read aloud, growing more confident each day. For his part, Jackson seemed to seek out her company beyond their scheduled lessons. He invited her to ride around the ranch with him, teaching her to sit a gentle mare named Buttercup. He asked her opinion on ranch decisions, genuinely considering her thoughts on matters she knew little about. He brought her small gifts from town, a new pen with a fine nib, a book of Tennyson poems, a warm shawl as the weather cooled. Mrs. Rodriguez noticed, of course. One afternoon, while they were preparing dinner together, the older woman gave Nora a knowing look. "Senor Lawson, he is different since you came. He smiles more. He whistles while he works. Before, he was always so serious, so alone." "We are friends," Nora said carefully. "He is my employer and my student. She and a flower is just a plant, and the sun is just a light in the sky, Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head with a smile. "You young people, always so afraid to see what is right in front of you." That night, Nora lay awake in her comfortable bed, listening to the sounds of the desert night through her open window. Was Mrs. Rodriguez right? Had something deeper than friendship developed between her and Jackson? And if it had, what could possibly come of it? She was still the same woman who had been fired for failing to meet society's standards. Jackson was a respected rancher who could have his pick of suitable women if he chose to marry. The thought of Jackson married to someone else sent an unexpected shaft of pain through her chest. That was when Nora knew the truth. She had fallen in love with her employer, her student, her friend. She had fallen in love with Jackson Lawson's quiet strength, his thirst for knowledge, his essential decency. She had fallen in love with the way he looked at her as if she was just a person, not a problem to be solved or an embarrassment to be hidden. But loving him and being able to have a life with him were two entirely different things. Nora decided to guard her heart more carefully and maintain the professional boundaries that had begun to blur. Jackson noticed her withdrawal immediately. After 3 days of Nora keeping their interactions strictly formal, he asked her to take a walk with him after their afternoon lesson. They strolled toward the spring that fed the ranch's water supply, following a worn path through the brush. "Have I done something to offend you?" Jackson asked directly. "You have been different this week. Distant." "Not at all. I simply felt that perhaps we had become too informal in our interactions. It is important to maintain appropriate boundaries." Jackson stopped walking and turned to face her. "Nora, I am going to be completely honest with you, and I am going to risk our friendship by doing it, but I cannot continue pretending. These past months have been the happiest of my life. Yes, learning to read and write better has been wonderful, but that is not the real reason. The real reason is you. I have fallen in love with you." Nora's heart hammered in her chest. "Jackson, you cannot mean that." "I have never meant anything more in my life. I love your intelligence and your kindness. I love the way you get excited about teaching. I love how you treat everyone with respect, from Mrs. Rodriguez to Pedro to the youngest ranch hand. I love your laugh and your terrible singing voice when you think no one can hear you. I love everything about you, and I do not give a damn what you weigh or what small-minded people think about how you look." "You should care," Nora said, her voice breaking. I was fired because of how I look. I have been rejected and ridiculed my entire life. If you were to court me, people would mock you. They would say terrible things. Your standing in the community would suffer." Jackson stepped closer, his eyes intense. "Let them say whatever they want. I stopped living my life for other people's approval when I was 12 years old and had to become a man overnight. I built this ranch with my own hands and sweat. I earned my place in this world, and I will choose who I love without asking permission from anyone." "But Jackson, what kind of life could we have? You deserve someone who fits in, someone who would be an asset to you instead of a liability." "You think you would be a liability?" Jackson's voice rose with frustration. "Nora, you are the smartest person I have ever met. You have transformed my entire world in just a few months. You have given me tools to grow my ranch more efficiently, because now I can read agricultural journals. You have helped Mrs. Rodriguez improve her English so much that she can now go to town and conduct business without worry. You have even been teaching some of the ranch hands to read in your spare time. How could any of that be a liability?" Nora felt tears streaming down her face. "I am afraid. I am so afraid of believing this could work and then losing everything again." Jackson reached out and gently wiped her tears with his thumb. "I am afraid too. I have never done this before, never told a woman I love her. But I would rather be afraid and honest than safe and alone. I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I am just asking if you could see yourself loving me back someday, if there is any chance at all." Nora looked into his earnest face and felt something break open inside her chest, some protective wall she had built brick by brick over years of rejection. "I already do love you. I have been trying so hard not to, but I do. I love you so much it terrifies me." Jackson's smile could have lit the darkest night. "Then we will be terrified together. That seems like a much better arrangement than being terrified separately." He took her hands in his, and they stood there by the desert spring as the sun began its descent. Two people who had found each other against all odds. Jackson leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was sweet and tender and full of promise. When they returned to the house, Mrs. Rodriguez took one look at their joined hands and clasped her own together with joy. "Finally. I will write to Father Hernandez in the morning. He will want plenty of notice for the wedding." "We have not discussed marriage yet," Nora protested, though she could not stop smiling. "You will," Mrs. Rodriguez said with complete confidence. "Senor Lawson is not a man who does things halfway." She was right. Over the following weeks, Jackson courted Nora with a straightforward determination that made her fall even more deeply in love with him. He took her on picnics to beautiful spots on the ranch. He read poetry to her in the evenings, his voice growing more confident with the difficult verse. He asked her opinions on everything from which bull to use for breeding to whether he should expand the herd or diversify into sheep. But he also listened when she spoke about her fears. One evening, curled up together on the porch swing he had installed just for her, Nora voiced her deepest worry. "What if you wake up one day and regret this? What if you see me and wish you had chosen differently?" Jackson tilted her chin up to meet his eyes. "Nora, I cannot promise that every day will be perfect. I get grumpy when I am tired, and I am stubborn as a mule about some things. We will probably argue about silly things like all couples do. But I can promise you this: I will never regret loving you. Your body is just the house that contains the person I love. I think you are beautiful, but even if you do not believe that, believe this. I see you, the real you, and that is who I love." In December of 1887, as the desert winter brought cold nights and mild days, Jackson asked Nora to marry him properly. He got down on one knee in the living room with Mrs. Rodriguez and Pedro as witnesses, and offered her a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "I know it is not fancy," he said, "but it is real and it lasts, like I hope our love will be." Nora said yes through happy tears, and they were married on Christmas Eve by Father Hernandez, who traveled from town for the ceremony. Pedro and Mrs. Rodriguez stood as witnesses, along with several ranch hands who had grown fond of both Jackson and Nora. Maria Rodriguez, beaming with pride, read a blessing she had written herself, demonstrating the reading skills Nora had taught her. The wedding was small and simple, held in the ranch house living room decorated with evergreen branches Mrs. Rodriguez had gathered. Nora wore a new dress she had sewn herself from soft gray fabric that Jackson said matched her eyes. She had worried about finding something that would fit properly, but Mrs. Rodriguez had helped her create something that was both flattering and comfortable. As Jackson slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her before their small gathering of friends, Nora felt a joy so complete it almost hurt. She had thought teaching was her only value, but she had learned that love could see worth that went far deeper than any job title. Their wedding night was tender and careful, with Jackson showing her a patience and care that made Nora feel cherished rather than merely tolerated. Afterward, as they lay together in his bed that was now their bed, Jackson traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever imagined possible. Are you? I am complete. I did not even know I was incomplete until you arrived, and now I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Marriage to Jackson was easier and more fulfilling than Nora had dared to hope. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, working together to manage the ranch and continuing their evening reading sessions that had evolved from lessons into shared intellectual exploration. Jackson now read as well as any educated man, and he had developed a particular fondness for history and poetry. But they also learned the give and take of two strong-willed people building a life together. They had their first real argument in February over Jackson's tendency to take physical risks while working. He had been thrown from a half-broken horse and could have been seriously injured. "You cannot be reckless with your safety," Nora said, her voice sharp with fear. "What would happen to the ranch, to all the people who depend on you if you were killed or crippled? I have been working with horses since I was a boy. I know what I am doing." "Knowing what you are doing does not make you invincible. You have someone who loves you now, someone who would be devastated if something happened to you. Does that not matter?" Jackson's anger deflated as he saw the genuine terror in her eyes. "Of course it matters. I am sorry. You are right. I will be more careful. I promise." He kept that promise, and Nora learned to trust that when Jackson gave his word, he meant it. She also learned to let go of her constant fear that he would suddenly see her differently, would wake up one day and regret his choice. His steady, unchanging love gradually convinced her that this was real and lasting. In the spring, Nora started a small school on the ranch for the children of the workers. It began with just Maria Rodriguez and two ranch hand sons, but word spread, and soon she had 8 students meeting 3 afternoons a week in the barn that Jackson had cleaned and furnished for her. She charged no tuition, but families contributed what they could in the form of food or labor. "You light up when you teach," Jackson observed one evening, watching her prepare lessons at her desk. "I did not realize how much I missed it until I started again. Thank you for encouraging me to do this. You do not need my encouragement to be yourself, but you are welcome all the same." That summer, Nora missed her monthly courses for the first time. Mrs. Rodriguez noticed her morning queasiness before Nora herself had put the pieces together. "You are with child, yes?" the older woman asked gently one morning. Nora sat down heavily in a kitchen chair, her mind reeling. "I think I might be. I had not wanted to hope in case I was wrong." You are not wrong. I have birthed 4 babies myself. I know the signs. This is wonderful news." When Nora told Jackson that evening, he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests about her weight, then immediately set her down and apologized for being too rough. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she laughed. "But yes, we will need to be a bit more careful now." Jackson knelt down and placed his hand gently on her stomach. "There is a child in there, our child. Nora, I never thought I would have a family of my own. I thought I would just work this ranch until I was too old to continue, and then I would die alone. Now look at everything I have." His eyes were bright with unshed tears, and Nora ran her fingers through his hair. "We built this together. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You saw value in me when I could barely see it in myself. The pregnancy was not easy." Nora's size made it difficult for her to tell how the baby was growing, and she tired more easily as the months progressed. But Jackson was attentive without being overbearing, and Mrs. Rodriguez shared wisdom from her own experiences. They sent for a doctor from Los Angeles who made the long journey twice during the pregnancy to check on both mother and child. "Everything appears healthy," the doctor assured them during his second visit in December of 1888. "The baby has a strong heartbeat, and Mrs. Lawson is doing well despite the additional strain on her body. I would recommend she stop teaching for the final 2 months and focus on rest." Nora reluctantly agreed, though she missed her students terribly. Maria Rodriguez took over some of the simpler lessons under Nora's supervision, and the older girl proved to be a natural teacher herself. On a cold night in late January 1889, Nora went into labor. Mrs. Rodriguez stayed by her side while Pedro rode into town for the doctor, and Jackson wore a path in the living room floor with his pacing. The labor lasted 14 hours, and there were moments when Nora thought she might not survive it. The pain was beyond anything she had imagined, and her body, already strained by her size, struggled with the effort. But finally, as dawn broke over the desert, a baby's cry filled the ranch house. Mrs. Rodriguez wrapped the infant carefully and placed him in Nora's exhausted arms. "You have a son," she said, smiling broadly. Jackson entered the room tentatively, his face drawn with worry until he saw Nora sitting up and smiling despite her obvious exhaustion. "Is he healthy? Are you well? Come meet your son," Nora said softly. Jackson approached the bed as if walking on sacred ground. When he looked down at the tiny face of his son, his expression transformed into something Nora had never seen before, pure, uncomplicated wonder. "He is perfect," Jackson whispered. "You are amazing. You did this." They named him James, after Jackson's father, with the middle name Robert after Nora's father. Little James was a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs and his father's dark hair. Jackson proved to be a devoted father, waking with Nora for night feedings even though he could not nurse the baby himself, just to keep her company. "You need to sleep," Nora told him one night after the third feeding. "You have a ranch to run in the morning. The ranch can wait. You and James are more important." Watching Jackson hold their son, singing off key lullabies he made up on the spot, Nora felt a contentment she had never known existed. This was what happiness looked like. Not a perfect life free from struggle, but a shared life built on love and respect and partnership. As James grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Jackson's improved literacy allowed him to manage the business side of ranching more effectively. He subscribed to agricultural journals and implemented new techniques he read about. He also began corresponding with other ranchers, sharing ideas and strategies. The ranch's profits increased significantly, and Jackson invested the extra money wisely. Nora's small school continued to grow. By 1891, she had 15 regular students and had to move the classes to a small building that Jackson and Pedro built specifically for that purpose. She still charged no tuition, but Jackson supported the school with his own funds, believing that an educated community benefited everyone. "You are creating something that will outlast both of us," he told Nora one evening as they watched 3-year-old James attempt to read his first simple words. "We are creating it together," she corrected. "None of this would exist without you." They tried for another child, but it did not happen easily. Nora suffered 2 miscarriages that left her heartbroken and Jackson feeling helpless. The doctor warned them that Nora's size and age, now 31, made pregnancy increasingly risky. "Perhaps James will be our only child," Nora said sadly one night after her second loss. "I should be grateful for him and not ask for more." Jackson held her while she cried. "We can be grateful for James and still mourn what we have lost. There is no rule that says we can only feel one thing at a time." But in the spring of 1893, Nora found herself pregnant again. This time, they were cautiously optimistic. The doctor recommended complete bed rest for the final 3 months, and Nora reluctantly complied. Maria Rodriguez, now 18 and a capable young woman, took over the school entirely under Nora's guidance. In October of 1893, Nora gave birth to a daughter they named Naomi Grace. The labor was even harder than James's birth had been, and afterward the doctor was blunt. "Mrs. Lawson, another pregnancy would likely kill you. Your body has been through tremendous strain. If you want to watch these children grow up, you cannot risk another birth." It was not the news they had hoped for, but they accepted it. 2 healthy children were more than many couples ever had. Naomi proved to be a calm baby who rarely fussed, and James, now nearly 5, was fascinated by his little sister. The years passed in the steady rhythm of ranch life. Jackson and Nora worked side by side, raising their children and building their community. The school became an official institution in 1895, with the state of California recognizing it and providing some funding. Nora hired 2 additional teachers to help manage the growing number of students. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as his parents did. Naomi was more adventurous, always begging her father to teach her to ride or rope. They were different in temperament, but equally loved. On their 10th wedding anniversary, in December of 1897, Jackson gave Nora a leather-bound journal filled with his own handwriting. "I wrote down the story of how we met and fell in love," he explained. "I wanted our children to know that love can happen in unexpected ways, and that the most important thing about a person is not what they look like but who they are inside." Nora read through his careful sentences, seeing how far he had come from the man who had struggled with basic primers. His writing was clear and eloquent, full of emotion and specific details she had forgotten. When she finished, she was crying. "You have given me so much," she said. "A home, a family, a purpose, but most of all, you have given me the gift of being seen and loved exactly as I am." "You did the same for me," Jackson replied. "I was just existing before you came. You taught me to truly live." As their children grew, Nora and Jackson made sure to teach them the values that had sustained their own unlikely love. They taught them to judge people by their character rather than their appearance. They taught them that education was a lifelong pursuit. They taught them that true courage meant standing up for what was right even when it was unpopular. In 1901, when James was 13 and Naomi was 8, the school had grown to 32 students. Nora had to hire 2 more teachers and expand the building again. The school had become a source of pride for the community, drawing families to the area who wanted their children to receive a good education. One evening that summer, Nora sat on the porch with Jackson, watching the sunset as they had done countless times over the years. James was in his room reading, and Naomi was helping Mrs. Rodriguez, now in her 60s but still spry, with dinner. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if the school in Randsburg had not fired you?" Jackson asked. Nora considered the question carefully. "Sometimes. I would probably still be teaching in a small schoolhouse somewhere, living alone, growing old without ever knowing what it was like to be loved. I was so angry when they fired me, but now I see it as the best thing that could have happened. It brought me to you." "I think I would have found you somehow," Jackson said. "I think we were meant to find each other. You believe in fate. I believe that some people are meant to be together, and that love has a way of finding a path even through the hardest terrain. Look at us, Nora. We should not have worked on paper, a fired schoolteacher and a rancher who could barely read. But here we are, 15 years later, with a family and a life we built from nothing but determination and love." Naomi burst through the door at that moment, her face excited. "Mama, Papa, Mrs. Rodriguez says dinner is ready and she made your favorite." Jackson stood and offered Nora his hand, pulling her gently to her feet. Even after 15 years of marriage, he still helped her stand, still treated her with care and respect. As they walked into the house together, following their daughter's happy chatter, Nora thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had been fired for her size, told she was not good enough, cast aside by a society that valued appearance over substance. But that rejection had led her to Jackson, who had hired her not despite who she was but because of it. He had needed a teacher, and she had needed someone who could see past her exterior to the person within. Together, they had built something neither could have created alone. A family, a school, a community, a love that had defied expectations. The years continued their steady progression. James went away to university in San Francisco in 1905, studying to become a lawyer with the goal of defending people who were treated unjustly. Naomi declared her intention to become a veterinarian, an unusual choice for a young woman, but one her parents supported wholeheartedly. Jackson's ranch had become one of the most successful in Kern County, not just because of good management, but because of his reputation for treating workers fairly and investing in the community. He and Nora had created employment for dozens of families over the years, and the school had educated hundreds of children. In 1908, Mrs. Rodriguez passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 70. Nora and Jackson mourned her deeply, for she had been not just an employee but a dear friend who had made their happiness possible. They ensured that Pedro was cared for in his remaining years, and when he followed his beloved wife 2 years later, they were buried together on a peaceful hill overlooking the ranch. As Nora entered her 50s, her health began to decline. The strain of 2 difficult pregnancies and years of managing her weight in a desert climate took their toll. She developed problems with her heart and joints that limited her mobility. The doctor advised rest and gentle exercise, but Nora was stubborn about continuing to teach. "I can sit in a chair and instruct students just as well as I can standing," she insisted when Jackson urged her to slow down. "I know you can, but I want you around for many more years. Please, Nora, think about reducing your hours." She agreed to a compromise. She would teach only in the mornings and would train younger teachers to gradually take over more responsibilities. It was hard for her to step back from work that had defined so much of her life, but she treasured the extra time with Jackson. They were in their 60s now, gray-haired and weathered by sun and time, but still deeply in love. They read together every evening, discussing books and current events and memories of their life together. Jackson had become an accomplished writer, contributing articles to agricultural journals, and even publishing a small memoir about building a ranch in the California desert. In 1913, James brought his new wife Margaret to meet his parents. She was a lovely young woman, intelligent and kind, who worked as a teacher herself. Nora liked her immediately and saw the way James looked at Margaret with the same devotion Jackson had always shown Nora. "You chose well, my son," Nora told him privately. "She is a woman of substance." "I learned from the best example," James replied, hugging his mother carefully. "You and Papa showed me what real love looks like." Naomi graduated from veterinary school in 1914, one of only a handful of women in her class. She returned to the area and opened a practice that served ranchers and farmers throughout the region. She remained unmarried, declaring herself perfectly content with her career and her family. "Not everyone needs romantic love to be complete," she told Nora. "You and Papa have that, and it is beautiful, but I am happy with the life I have chosen." Nora understood, though she secretly hoped Naomi might someday find a partner to share her life with. But she respected her daughter's choices and was proud of all she had accomplished. On Christmas Eve of 1916, the family gathered at the ranch to celebrate Jackson and Nora's 29th wedding anniversary. James and Margaret had brought their 2 young children, a boy and a girl. Naomi was there, along with several of the ranch workers who had become like family over the years. As they sat around the table sharing a feast and telling stories, Nora looked around at the faces of the people she loved. She thought back to that desperate day in Randsburg when she had lost her teaching job and her sense of worth. She could never have imagined then that losing everything would lead to gaining so much more. After dinner, Jackson asked everyone to quiet down. He stood, his joints protesting slightly but his voice still strong. 29 years ago, I took a chance on hiring a schoolteacher to educate this stubborn rancher. It was the best decision I ever made. Nora, you taught me to read and write, but more importantly, you taught me to love. You showed me that a person's value has nothing to do with their appearance and everything to do with their character. You have made me a better man, a better father, and I hope a better citizen of this world." He pulled out a small box and opened it to reveal a delicate gold necklace with a pendant shaped like an open book. "I had this made for you. The book represents how we started, teacher and student, but it is open because our story is not finished yet." Nora stood and let Jackson fasten the necklace around her throat, tears streaming down her face. "How do you still find ways to surprise me after all these years? Because you are worth the effort today and every day." They kissed to the applause and gentle teasing of their family, and Nora felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt on that first kiss by the desert spring decades ago. In the spring of 1918, Nora's health took a serious turn. Her heart was failing, and the doctor was honest about her limited time. Jackson refused to accept it at first, consulting with specialists from as far as Los Angeles, but eventually he had to face the reality that he would lose the love of his life. Nora faced her declining health with the same practical courage she had shown throughout her life. She made sure all her affairs were in order, wrote letters to her children and grandchildren, and spent her remaining energy on the people she loved. One warm afternoon in May, she asked Jackson to take her out to the desert spring where they had first confessed their love. He carried her there in his arms, refusing any assistance, and they sat together on a blanket while the afternoon sun painted everything gold. "I've had a wonderful life," Nora said softly, leaning against Jackson's shoulder. "I would not change a single thing, not even the parts that hurt, because they all led me here to you." "Do not talk like you are already gone," Jackson said, his voice breaking. "I need more time with you. 30 years is not enough." A lifetime would not be enough, my love, but we have been blessed with more than most people ever have. We have loved deeply and truly. We have raised good children who will carry on our values. We have built something that will outlast us both. That is more than I ever dreamed possible. Jackson held her close, and they sat in silence, listening to the sound of water flowing from the spring and birds calling in the distance. It was a perfect moment, crystalline and pure, the kind of moment that defines a life. Nora passed away peacefully in her sleep a week later, with Jackson holding her hand and their children at her bedside. She was 61 years old, and she had lived long enough to see her vision for the school fully realized, and her children settled into their own successful lives. Jackson was devastated by her loss. For months, he moved through his days like a ghost, tending the ranch mechanically and speaking little. James and Naomi worried about him, but gradually he began to heal. He threw himself into preserving Nora's legacy, ensuring the school would continue to thrive and that her teaching methods would be documented and shared. He published Nora's teaching journals and his own memoir about their life together, titled Teaching the Heart. The book became popular throughout California and beyond, telling their unusual love story and championing Nora's progressive educational methods. Royalties from the book funded scholarships for students who wanted to become teachers. Jackson lived another 12 years, remaining active in the ranch and the community until his health finally failed. In his final days, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, he spoke often of Nora and how much he looked forward to seeing her again. "Your mother taught me everything that mattered," he told James and Naomi. "She taught me that love sees what others miss, that true value is measured in character, not appearance, and that education opens doors no one can close. She was the bravest person I ever knew, living openly and fully in a world that told her she should hide. I am so grateful I got to love her and be loved by her." Jackson Lawson died in his sleep in 1930 at the age of 76. He was buried beside Nora on the hill, overlooking the ranch they had built together, under a stone that read, "Together we learned that love is the greatest teacher." The school that Nora had started in a barn continued for generations, eventually becoming part of the California public school system, but always maintaining the inclusive, compassionate approach she had pioneered. Her methods influenced educational theory throughout the state and beyond. James became a prominent civil rights lawyer who fought against discrimination in all its forms, inspired by his mother's experiences and his parents' example of standing against injustice. Naomi ran her veterinary practice for 40 years and never married, finding fulfillment in her work and her independence. Both children spoke often of their parents' unusual love story, of how a desperate schoolteacher fired for her size, and a rancher who wanted to learn had found each other in the California desert and built a life that defied all expectations. They taught their own children and grandchildren the lessons Jackson and Nora had lived. That appearance matters far less than character, that education is a lifelong journey, and that true love sees the worth in people that others overlook. The ranch remained in the Lawson family for another 70 years before finally being sold in the late 20th century. But even then, the new owners preserved the small cemetery on the hill where Jackson and Nora were buried, along with the Rodriguez family and several longtime ranch workers who had requested to be laid to rest on land they loved. The schoolhouse was eventually converted into a museum celebrating Nora's educational innovations and the unusual love story that had made them possible. Visitors came from across the country to learn about the woman who had turned rejection into opportunity, who had transformed one cowboy's request for education into a movement that changed countless lives. In the end, Nora Bennett Lawson's greatest lesson was not about reading or mathematics or any academic subject. It was about the transformative power of being seen, truly seen, by another person. Jackson had looked past society's judgments to recognize Nora's worth, and in doing so, he had given her the courage to see it herself. Together, they had proven that love based on genuine respect and partnership could overcome any obstacle, could build something lasting and beautiful from the most unlikely beginnings. Their story became legend in that part of California. The obese schoolteacher who was fired for her size, and the cowboy who hired her to teach his heart. But to their children and grandchildren, to the hundreds of students Nora taught and the community that grew up around their ranch, they were simply two people who had loved each other deeply and had made the world better by doing so. That was their true legacy, not recorded in any official history, but living on in the lives they had touched, and the love they had shared so completely that it could never truly die.